The discovery that gut microbiome composition and metabolic activity exhibit robust diurnal oscillations has opened fascinating questions about how meal timing influences this rhythmicity and subsequent host metabolism. Controlled feeding trials incorporating serial stool sampling across 24-hour periods before and after time-restricted eating interventions reveal that eating window compression substantially alters the temporal dynamics of microbial communities. Metagenomic sequencing demonstrates that both the abundance and relative prevalence of specific bacterial taxa oscillate in synchrony with feeding fasting cycles, with certain metabolically active species showing peak activity during anticipated feeding windows and relative quiescence during fasting periods. The functional consequences extend beyond compositional changes to alterations in microbial metabolite production rhythms. Short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate and propionate, show shifted diurnal patterns following time-restricted eating adoption, with production peaks consolidating during and immediately after eating windows. These metabolites serve as signaling molecules influencing host glucose homeostasis, with butyrate enhancing intestinal gluconeogenesis and propionate modulating hepatic glucose production. Similarly, secondary bile acid transformation shows temporal reorganization, potentially affecting lipid absorption efficiency and Farnesoid X receptor signaling in metabolically active tissues. The critical question becomes whether these shifted rhythms contribute mechanistically to observed metabolic effects or merely represent correlated phenomena. Temporal correlation analyses suggest genuine metabolic integration between microbiome rhythms and host glucose handling. Participants showing the most pronounced shifts in microbial metabolite oscillation patterns also demonstrate the greatest improvements in glycemic control, even when calories remain constant. The mechanism likely involves microbial metabolites serving as zeitgebers for peripheral tissue clocks, particularly in the liver and adipose tissue, thereby reinforcing circadian alignment induced by meal timing changes. However, the effect magnitude appears modest when calorie intake remains matched, indicating that microbiome rhythm changes represent one component of a complex system rather than a dominant driver. Individual variation in microbiome composition and plasticity further modulates outcomes, with some participants showing robust rhythmic reorganization while others exhibit minimal change despite identical meal timing shifts. The translational implications remain preliminary but intriguing. Optimizing meal timing for individual microbiome characteristics might eventually enable personalized recommendations, though current understanding lacks the precision required for clinical application. Combining time-restricted eating with targeted prebiotics or probiotics could theoretically amplify beneficial microbiome rhythm effects, representing a fertile area for future investigation. However, researchers must resist premature conclusions about causality given the correlational nature of much evidence and the difficulty of experimentally manipulating microbiome rhythms independently of host feeding behavior. The gut microbiome undoubtedly participates in the metabolic integration of meal timing signals, but its relative contribution compared to direct tissue-level circadian entrainment remains uncertain and likely context-dependent based on baseline metabolic health, dietary composition, and individual microbiome ecology.